Hi, welcome to the Creative Cow DSLR Essentials podcast. My name is Rich Harrington.
And I'm Robbie Carmen.
And today we're going to kick off the first in a three-part series on creating time-lapse, which is one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah, time-lapse is cool, and time-lapse is one of those things that I think photographers as well as videographers have favored for years for creating cool looks, showing the passage of time, obviously. That's one of the purposes of time-lapse. But now it's sort of cool because, in these DSLRs, you have a great video camera, but you still have all the great still capabilities of the camera you can use. And one of my favorite uses is using the still side of the camera to create nice, high-resolution, beautiful time lapses.
Well, to just quickly define time-lapse, I think a lot of video people hear time-lapse and they think motion effect, like, oh, I shot an hour of video and I'm going to speed it up so it plays back faster. Well,
right.
That's how you might do time-lapse with a video camera, but with a still camera, you get all sorts of wonderful options because it's such a higher resolution image.
Well, right, on video cameras there are ways of, obviously saying only record for 1 frame or 1 second
Variable
or whatever.
frame rate cameras.
Yeah,
like
I mean you can do a whole bunch of stuff on the video camera side of things, but you're right. The traditional video, the traditional time lapse has been done with a still camera.
Back in the days of film, this was really expensive, but the invention of digital memory, it's gotten really cheap.
Absolutely.
And I've been shooting time-lapse longer than DSLR video's been around. It's been something I've always loved doing.
Yep.
And I think we've got a pretty solid workflow that is going to really help you out.
So yeah, I think we do. And in this first episode, as you mentioned, we'll cover this in over 3 episodes. Let's talk about what you're going to need when you want to go out there and shoot time-lapse. Because, it's not quite as simple, obviously, as just going out and going, oh, I'm going to shoot some time-lapse. You need some certain pieces of equipment. So let's start off with the trusty tripod.
Yeah, I think it's important here is, you can't underestimate the importance of the tripod. It needs to be rock solid.
Now, from a video standpoint, obviously tripod is just to stabilize the image. But from a time-lapse standpoint, it stabilizes the image, obviously, but in the end product, it gives you one consistent frame. If you try to do time-lapse and you're going, you're going to see in that end product time-lapse everything moving all over the place and being very distracted.
Yeah, and you want to try, a lot of tripods have the ability to sort of ped up here. The more you raise this up, the less stable it's going to get. Yep. You tend to vibration. So try to keep that center column down, tighten everything down. Make sure you get it out there, make sure it's level, all the things you do. And one of the things I'll often do is, there's a hook on here, I'll hang some extra weight off of this.
Put your camera bag or something on the bottom of it just to stabilize it. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, and then really, once you get set, the hardest thing to do, and you're going to laugh when I tell you this, is to not touch the camera.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And to make sure that other people don't touch the camera. I was shooting a beautiful time-lapse in Seattle, and I had put the camera tripod up on a bench, to get it a little bit higher, and it was great until somebody sat down on the bench in the middle of the shot, and the camera just, I was like, well, maybe nothing happened. Sure enough, when I went to put it together, there's this giant chunk right in the middle of the shot.
That's annoying. And I think the second piece of essential equipment is an intervalometer. Now, some cameras, like your Nikon here, actually has this function built in, right?
Yeah, and it's great. That's nice that it comes in, and Nikon's been doing that for a while. Canon, it tends to be an add-on.
Right, and actually, Canon obviously makes their own. I actually found this guy on Amazon from, some no-name company compatible with my 7D here. It was like $30 or whatever. It does, most of the job for me. And what this little guy does is it connects to the camera, and you see this cable right here. And what it allows me to do is adjust for how long I'm going to shoot and how often I'm going to shoot. And then once I set that information into the intervalometer, I just click go. And I walk away, and it's going to take control over the camera, firing off, say, 1 photo every, 30 seconds for 2 hours.
And what you want to be careful of, a lot of people, they'll plug this into the camera, and then they'll just let this dangle.
Yeah.
And the wind's going to come, it's going to start to blow.
Tripod, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to cause vibration. So you're going to want to take one of those elastic straps or those Velcro straps and just, tack that right onto the side there.
Yep.
Or, loop it around your hook.
Right.
So it doesn't, it's not blowing around, because you need to keep that solid.
Right.
So, obviously there, you got the solid platform, you got the tripod. If you're doing long time lapse, like, you're shooting over an extended period, there's 2 sort of optional items.
Yep.
One is weather gear.
Yep.
They make boxes for these cameras. So if you're trying to capture the construction of a building over a 6-month period and you're shooting 1 frame an hour for that period, well, then you're going to need to probably put that camera in a weather box, because these cameras aren't really designed for that.
Have it be powered and all sorts of, there's a lot of considerations.
That's the next thing. And I'm amazed at the number of people who don't buy the external power brick for their camera.
Yeah, yeah. Or if, at the very least, say a battery grip. You know, we're going to get some extra power out of it.
Well, extra power, yeah. And people are like, oh, well, you know, during the shoot, you know, I could just, when the battery goes dead, I'll just turn this and pop it out. Well, that's vibration.
Bad idea.
Yeah, so you hit it. You know, a battery grip is great. You got 2 batteries. That's going to extend what you can do. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with going with external power if you're in a controlled situation.
Sure.
Now, unlike shooting video, firing off stills is not going to suck the batteries as dry. 2 batteries can go for 6 hours shooting stills.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so then the next component, and I think that's a pretty essential thing, is, well, it's math, right? Is that when you're shooting time lapse, you need to be able to figure out how many photos you need to take, how often you're going to take them to fill a certain amount of space in your program, right? So for example, if I'm let's say my playback frame rate of my show is 24 frames per second, right? If I wanted to have a time lapse that would fit, say, 1 second, well, obviously that's very easy. I need to take 24 stills every second to fit that, right?
Yeah, but how about a 75-second open?
Right.
Quick, do the math.
But it can get very
do the math.
It can get very complicated very quickly when you're trying to figure out how many exposures you want to have, the time you're trying to fill, the duration of the event, and then there's other factors that go into that, right? Because you might want to take exposures separated by longer periods of time and whatnot. So one of the things,
it's not just the number of frames you need, but it's how long of a period you're trying to condense down.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to make, no qualms about it. I'm not a math major. And so I can't do those calculations in my head, right? And I've actually found a couple quite useful tools. One of them is just if you're an iPhone user, I actually just found a little time-lapse calculator, right? Just this little guy right here. And what it allows you to type in is your video frame rate. It allows you to say how many photos you're going to take at one exposure, how long of a time that you're trying to fill, and it will do all these various calculations. And so it will give you the exact numbers, so if you're trying to fill a 15-second hole and you want the event's going to last for 4 hours, this is how many photos you need to take, and so on and so forth. And I find that very useful.
That definitely helps. There is a little bit of leeway when you get to post. Like I post my time-lapse shots using After Effects, and After Effects is pretty intelligent at throwing away frames if you have too many. But obviously, if you don't shoot enough frames, then you're going to get, not smooth motion.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a later episode because there's a lot of things that go into the time lapse besides just the gear you need, right? What shutter speed you're going to use, all sorts of things that are going to affect sort of the smoothness of motion over the course of the clip.
So we got all that gear, and there's one other piece of gear you left off, and it's because I'm paranoid.
Oh yeah.
I bring a second camera.
Yep.
I may even bring a third camera because, truth be told, the sun only rises once a day and sets once a day.
Right.
So, not that you only shoot sunrises and sunsets, but that's a prime thing, and it's hard to get the lighting right. Why not set a second camera body up at a different frame rate or on a different composition?
Right.
So it's going to give you the flexibility.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about, again, some more of those specific things in a later episode. But yeah, things of how do you how do you set proper exposure over the course of a time lapse lasting for an entire day and stuff like that. But you're right. The one thing I was going to mention too about, an essential piece of gear is that you're going to want, when it comes to memory cards for shooting time lapse, right? Obviously, if you're shooting for an entire day or multiple days or whatever, you're going to want to ensure that, you do a little bit of math, that you're going to have enough capacity of your memory card to take up for however long you want to shoot.
And not just capacity, because a lot of people don't realize that when they're shooting these high-res pictures, they might actually be using higher data rate in bursts than they would when shooting video.
Oh, absolutely. So, when I think about it, I always do a little bit of math after I use my trusty time-lapse calculator to figure out how many exposure I'm going to need. I then do some more math to say, oh, you know what? I need to have a 64 gig card in the camera that day because I'm going to be shooting just a boatload of images.
Yeah, because again, all of this comes back to, and this is a good summary just on the gear here, and our next episode we're going to talk about shooting techniques, is a stable platform that does not move, that does not get bumped. A solid camera body. In this particular case here, I'm using a really right stuff bracket, and it can clock in here. So I could pop the plate, drop that in, either in portrait, landscape, either mode. So here we're in portrait. And you could shoot time-lapse in portrait mode, shooting a building. You want that rock solid. And notice how that locked in, no vibration. Tighten everything down, mount it. That's good. Get this strong power supply so it's not going to change a battery, You're going to need enough storage because you can't change a card. And then obviously the intervalometer lets you program that and it'll go through. And you got a choice. I actually leave mine to do the beeping, and you sort of have to be close enough to listen because if your card's too slow, it might lock up. So you're listening to it, firing it off, firing it off. And at that point, then you're in pretty good shape. Sort of the last piece of gear you might bring is a laptop into the field. And I'll show you later on how I use Adobe Bridge to sort of quickly test my shots to see if they're working. So all these pieces come into play. You know, lens choice is up to you. Better lens, better picture. But you need all of this gear, especially that intervalometer, or maybe it's built in, to get these cool shots.
But yeah, I think the most important thing is that time lapse is just cool. You know, and it can give you some really cool effects. And so, unlike a lot of other things in life where there's a right or there's a wrong, when it comes to time lapse, just get out there and have fun with it. You know, one of the coolest things that I do, you know, if I'm just, you know, bored at home one day, I'll just stick the camera out the window or put it on the deck or whatever, and just fire off a 3-hour time lapse of, you know, my woods in my backyard. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, I get a pretty cool looking shot. So it's fun to do for sure.
So wonderful things here with time lapse. We're going to explore the shooting techniques next, but get the right gear and you're going to be all set to go. So for Creative Cow, my name is Rich Harrington.
And I'm Robbie Carmen.
Be sure to head on over to creativecow.net where you can check out the forums and all sorts of other online opportunities, including subscribing to the podcast in HD. Thanks.